The moment Benjamin Nash heard the voice rising from his wheat field, he thought an angel had descended from heaven to mock his loneliness with beauty he could never possess. It was August 1878 in Montezuma, New Mexico, and the sun beat down mercilessly on his land like it had every day for the past 3 months. Benjamin had been checking his irrigation ditches, worried about the drought that threatened to ruin him, when the singing stopped him cold. The voice was clear and pure, carrying a hymn he recognized from his childhood, back when his mother still lived and Sunday mornings meant gathered families and hope. Benjamin was 32 years old, and he had been alone on this ranch for 5 years since his parents passed from fever. He worked from sunup to sundown, spoke to his horses more than people, and had nearly forgotten what it felt like to hear a woman's laughter or song. The sound drew him forward like a rope around his chest, pulling him through the golden wheat that swayed in the hot breeze. When he crested the small hill, he saw her. A woman in a faded blue dress knelt in the middle of his field, her hands clasped together, her face turned toward the sky. Her dark hair fell in waves down her back, and even from a distance, Benjamin could see tears streaming down her cheeks as she sang. The hymn was "Come, Thou Fount of Every Blessing," and her voice never wavered despite the emotion clearly overwhelming her. Benjamin stood frozen, hat in hand, unsure whether to interrupt what was clearly a private moment of worship. But his boots shifted in the dry earth, and the sound made her whirl around, eyes wide with fear. "I am sorry," she said immediately, scrambling to her feet. "I did not mean to trespass. Please, I will leave right away." Her voice carried a slight accent, Spanish perhaps, though her English was perfect. Up close, Benjamin could see she was young, maybe 24 or 25, with warm brown eyes that held exhaustion and something else, something like desperation. "No need to apologize," Benjamin said, his voice rough from disuse. "This is my land, true enough, but I have never minded someone praying on it. Are you all right, miss? You are crying." She wiped at her face quickly, straightening her spine with visible effort. "I am fine. I was just passing through and needed a moment. Your field seemed peaceful." "Passing through to where?" Benjamin asked. "Montezuma is not exactly on the way to anywhere, and the next town is 15 miles in any direction." The woman hesitated, and Benjamin could see her weighing whether to trust him. Finally, she said, "I came from Santa Fe. I was supposed to meet my brother here, but when I arrived this morning, I learned he moved on to Colorado 3 weeks ago. I have no money for the stage, and I do not know anyone here." Benjamin felt something twist in his chest. He knew what it was like to be alone, though at least he had land and a home. This woman had nothing, stranded in a dusty territory town with nowhere to go. "What is your name?" he asked. "Grace Guerrero," she said. "And you?" "Benjamin Nash. I own this ranch, about 200 acres. It is not much, but it is mine." He paused, knowing what he was about to offer would change everything, but unable to stop himself. "Miss Guerrero, I know we just met, but I cannot in good conscience leave you stranded. I have a spare room in my house, and I could use help with cooking and mending if you are willing to work for room and board until you figure out your next step." Grace's eyes widened. "Sir, that is very generous, but I could not impose." "It is not an imposition if I am offering," Benjamin said. "And before you worry about propriety, I should mention that my neighbor, Mrs. Crawford, lives just a mile down the road. She can vouch for my character, and you are welcome to check with her. I am not trying to take advantage. I am just offering help." Grace studied his face for a long moment. Benjamin had no idea what she saw there, but whatever it was seemed to satisfy her because she nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Nash. I accept your offer. I promise I will work hard to earn my keep." "Just call me Benjamin," he said, "and I have no doubt you will." That was how Grace Guerrero came to live on Benjamin Nash's ranch, and how both their lives changed forever. The first week was awkward in the way that all new arrangements are. Benjamin was not used to having another person in his house, and he found himself hyper-aware of every sound Grace made. She moved quietly through the rooms, cooking meals that were far better than anything he had managed in years, mending his shirts with neat, precise stitches, and keeping herself scarce when he came in from the fields. But every evening at sunset, Grace would walk out to the fields and sing. Sometimes it was hymns, sometimes Spanish songs Benjamin did not know, but always her voice carried across the land with a beauty that made his chest ache. He would stop whatever he was doing and just listen, feeling something inside him slowly come back to life after years of dormancy. On the 8th day, Benjamin finished his work early and found Grace in the garden behind the house, pulling weeds from the vegetable patch. Her dress was dusty, and her hair was tied back with a faded ribbon, but she hummed as she worked, and the sound made him smile. "You have a gift," he said, and Grace looked up, startled. "Your singing, I mean. It is remarkable." Grace's face flushed. "Thank you. My mother taught me. She said music was the language of the soul, the way we speak to God when words are not enough." "Your mother was a wise woman," Benjamin said, crouching down beside her. "Where is she now?" The light in Grace's eyes dimmed. "She died 2 years ago, consumption. My father passed when I was young, so it was just my mother, my brother, and me. After she died, my brother and I tried to make it work, but times were hard. He heard about work in the Colorado mines and wanted to try his luck. I was supposed to join him, but..." She shrugged. "Here I am instead." "I am sorry about your mother," Benjamin said quietly. "I lost both my parents to fever 5 years back. It is a hard thing being alone." Grace met his eyes, and in that moment, Benjamin felt a connection snap into place between them, a recognition of shared grief and loneliness. "Yes," she said softly, "it is." After that, the awkwardness between them began to ease. They started talking more during meals, sharing stories about their families, their hopes, their fears. Benjamin told Grace about his dreams of expanding the ranch, maybe getting some cattle to go along with the wheat. Grace told him about her childhood in a small village near Santa Fe, about her mother's garden and her brother's terrible jokes. And every evening, Benjamin would find himself drawn outside to listen to Grace sing. It became his favorite part of the day, that golden hour when the work was done and her voice filled the air. He began to think of it as a gift she gave him, though she never knew he was listening. 3 weeks after Grace arrived, a storm rolled in from the mountains. It was the kind of summer thunderstorm that could either save or destroy a crop, and Benjamin spent the afternoon watching the sky with mounting anxiety. His wheat was nearly ready for harvest, and a bad storm could flatten it all. The rain started just after supper, and within an hour it was pouring. Benjamin stood on the porch, watching sheets of water hammer the earth, and felt Grace come up beside him. "Will the wheat survive?" she asked. "I do not know," Benjamin admitted. "If the wind gets too strong or the hail starts, I could lose everything." Grace was quiet for a moment, then said, "Then we should pray." Before Benjamin could respond, she stepped out into the rain, her dress immediately soaking through, and began to sing. Not a hymn this time, but a prayer in Spanish, her voice rising above the sound of the storm. Benjamin stared at her, this woman who had appeared in his field like an answer to a prayer he had not known to ask, and felt something break open in his chest. He stepped out into the rain beside her, not singing but standing with her, and they stayed there together as the storm raged around them. The rain was cold and the wind fierce, but Benjamin felt warmer than he had in years, standing beside Grace as she sang her prayer into the chaos. The storm passed after an hour, and miraculously, the wheat stood. The rain had been exactly what the crop needed, and when Benjamin checked the fields the next morning, he knew the harvest would be good. He came back to the house to find Grace making breakfast, her hair still damp from her bath. "Thank you," he said. She turned, surprised. "For what? For praying, for singing, for being here." The words tumbled out before he could stop them. "Grace, I know you are only staying until you can afford to move on, but I want you to know that having you here has meant more to me than I can say. This house has not felt like a home in years, not until you came." Grace set down the spatula she was holding, her eyes searching his face. "Benjamin, I need to tell you something. I wrote to my brother 2 weeks ago and I received his reply yesterday. He sent money for a stage ticket and asked me to come to Colorado as soon as possible." Benjamin felt like he had been punched. "Oh, of course. That is good news. When do you leave?" "That is the thing," Grace said slowly. "I am not sure I want to go." "What do you mean?" Grace twisted her hands together, a gesture Benjamin had come to recognize as nerves. "My brother is a good man, but we are not close. We have different dreams, different paths. Going to Colorado means following his life, not building my own. And these past weeks, being here with you, I have felt something I have not felt since my mother died. I have felt at home." Benjamin's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "Are you saying you want to stay?" "I am saying I do not want to leave," Grace said. "But I cannot stay here indefinitely as your housekeeper, Benjamin. It would not be proper and people would talk." "Then do not stay as my housekeeper," Benjamin said, crossing the distance between them in 3 long steps. "Grace, I know this is fast, maybe too fast, but I have never been good at pretending. Since the day I heard you singing in my field, you have changed everything. You brought life back to this place, back to me. I am falling in love with you, and if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, then stay. Stay as my wife." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "You are right, it is fast. We have only known each other a few weeks." "I know," Benjamin said. "But I also know that I wake up every morning grateful you are here, and I go to bed every night thanking God for the day I heard you singing. I know that, when I think about my future, you are in it. That is enough for me, but if it is not enough for you, I understand." "Benjamin," Grace said, reaching up to touch his face. "I have been praying for guidance since the day I arrived, asking God what I should do, where I should go. And every time I pray, I feel peace when I think about staying here with you. I think maybe God led me to your field that day. I think maybe you are the answer to my prayers, just as I hope I am the answer to yours." "You are," Benjamin said hoarsely. "You absolutely are." "Then yes," Grace said. "Yes, I will marry you." Benjamin pulled her into his arms, holding her close, breathing in the scent of her hair and feeling like he had finally found the piece of himself that had been missing. When he pulled back, he was grinning like a fool, and Grace was laughing through her tears. "We are both completely insane," she said. "Probably," Benjamin agreed, "but I do not care." They married 3 weeks later in the small church in Montezuma, with Mrs. Crawford and her husband standing as witnesses. Grace wore a new dress that Benjamin had insisted on buying her, pale yellow cotton with white lace at the collar, and she looked so beautiful that Benjamin could barely breathe when he saw her. The ceremony was simple and short, the words familiar, but made new by the emotion behind them. When the preacher told Benjamin he could kiss his bride, he cupped Grace's face in his hands and kissed her gently, reverently, like she was something precious that might break. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "I love you too," Grace whispered back. They held a small celebration at the ranch that evening. Mrs. Crawford had helped Grace prepare food, and a few of the neighboring ranchers came by to offer congratulations and share a drink. Benjamin had never been one for parties, but seeing Grace laugh and dance in the firelight, seeing her fit so naturally into this community and this life, made his heart swell with happiness. When the last guest left and they were finally alone, Benjamin took Grace's hand and led her inside. The house was quiet, lit only by the lamps Grace had set out earlier, and suddenly Benjamin felt nervous in a way he had not expected. "I have never done this before," he admitted. "Been married, I mean, been with a woman. I want to make you happy, Grace, but I am not sure I know how." Grace squeezed his hand, her eyes warm with love and understanding. "Neither have I, and I am nervous too, but we will figure it out together. That is what marriage is it not? Learning each other, growing together." "I suppose so," Benjamin said, pulling her close. "I just want you to know that you are everything to me. You brought joy and light and music back into my life. You made me believe in happiness again." "You did the same for me," Grace said. "You offered me kindness when I had nothing. You gave me a home and a future. You listened to my singing and made me feel valued. Benjamin, you have no idea how much that meant." He kissed her then, slowly and deeply, pouring all his love and gratitude into the kiss. And when they moved to the bedroom, they came together with tenderness and wonder, discovering each other with gentle hands and whispered words of love. The next morning, Benjamin woke before dawn as he always did, but this time Grace was beside him, her dark hair spread across the pillow, her face peaceful in sleep. He watched her for a long moment, still hardly believing she was his wife, that this beautiful, kind, talented woman had chosen him. Grace stirred, opening her eyes and smiling when she saw him watching her. "Good morning, husband." "Good morning, wife," Benjamin said, the word feeling strange and wonderful on his tongue. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in years," Grace said. "I think it is because I finally feel safe." Benjamin pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "You are safe. I promise I will always keep you safe." The harvest that year was the best Benjamin had ever had. The wheat came in golden and full, and the prices were good. With the money, he was able to buy lumber to repair the barn and purchase 3 young heifers to start a small cattle operation. Grace threw herself into ranch life with enthusiasm, learning to milk the cows, tend the chickens, and help Benjamin with the endless work that came with running a ranch. But she never stopped singing. Every evening, without fail, Grace would walk out to the fields and sing as the sun set. Sometimes Benjamin would join her, standing beside her and listening, and sometimes he would watch from the porch. But always, her voice filled him with a sense of peace and rightness, a feeling that he was exactly where he was meant to be. As fall turned to winter, they settled into the rhythms of married life. They learned each other's habits and quirks, had their first arguments and their first real reconciliations. Grace discovered that Benjamin could be stubborn about asking for help when he was sick, and Benjamin learned that Grace needed quiet time alone in the mornings to pray and gather her thoughts. But through it all, their love deepened and grew. They talked for hours in the evenings, sharing their thoughts and dreams. They made love with increasing confidence and joy, learning what brought each other pleasure. And they built a life together, piece by piece, day by day. Winter in New Mexico could be harsh, and that year was no exception. A blizzard rolled in just before Christmas, dumping 2 feet of snow and keeping them trapped in the house for 3 days. But Benjamin found he did not mind. He spent the time sitting by the fire with Grace, reading to her from his small collection of books, playing cards, and making love in the warm cocoon of their bed while the wind howled outside. On Christmas Eve, Grace surprised him by singing Silent Night in Spanish. Her voice was soft and sweet, and when she finished, Benjamin found himself crying for the first time since his parents died. "What is wrong?" Grace asked, alarmed. "Nothing," Benjamin said, wiping his eyes. "I am just so happy. I spent so many years alone, thinking this was all my life would ever be. Work and solitude and more work. But you changed everything. You gave me a reason to hope, to dream, to believe that life could be beautiful again. You are the best Christmas present I have ever received." Grace cried too then, and they held each other by the firelight, grateful for the love they had found in each other. By spring, Grace suspected she was pregnant. She waited until she was sure before telling Benjamin, nervous about how he would react. But when she finally said the words over breakfast one morning, Benjamin's face lit up with such pure joy that all her fears vanished. "A baby," he said, his voice awed. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Grace said, smiling through happy tears. "In the fall, I think, around October." Benjamin whooped and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. Then he knelt beside her chair, pressing his face to her still flat belly. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your father, and I cannot wait to meet you. I promise I will do everything I can to give you a good life, to keep you and your mother safe and happy." Grace ran her fingers through Benjamin's hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "You are going to be a wonderful father." "I hope so," Benjamin said, looking up at her with shining eyes. "I want to be the kind of father mine was, steady and kind and always there. I want our children to grow up knowing they are loved." "Children," Grace teased. "We are only having one right now." "I know, but I hope this is just the first," Benjamin said. "I always wanted a big family, lots of voices and laughter filling this house." "What about you?" "I would like that," Grace said softly. "I grew up with just my brother, and I always wished for more siblings." "Yes, let us fill this house with children and love and music." The pregnancy was not easy. Grace suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and there were days when she could barely get out of bed. Benjamin hovered anxiously, doing everything he could to help, bringing her water and crackers, rubbing her back, and singing to her in his rough, off-key voice that made her laugh despite her misery. "You are not as good at singing as I am," she teased weakly one morning after a particularly bad bout of nausea. "No one is as good at singing as you are," Benjamin said, kissing her forehead. "But I am trying." As Grace's belly grew, Benjamin became increasingly protective. He insisted she rest more, forbade her from lifting anything heavy, and worried constantly about her health. Grace found it endearing if occasionally frustrating. "Benjamin, I am pregnant, not made of glass," she said one afternoon when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will be fine." "I know," Benjamin said, "but you are my wife, and that baby is my child, and if something happened to either of you, I would not survive it. So please let me take care of you." Grace softened at the vulnerability in his voice. "All right, but you have to let me do some things. I will go mad if I just sit around all day." They compromised. Grace continued to do light housework and cooking, but Benjamin took over the heavier chores. And every evening, even when she was tired and her back ached, Grace would walk out to the fields and sing. The baby seemed to move more when she sang, as if already responding to the music, and Grace would place her hands on her belly and feel connected to the new life growing inside her. In late October, Grace went into labor. It was a cool, clear night, and Benjamin was asleep beside her when she woke with the first pains. She lay still for a moment, breathing through the contraction, then gently shook Benjamin awake. "Benjamin, it is time." He was instantly alert, his eyes wide with panic. "Time, now, are you sure?" "Yes," Grace said, trying not to smile at his expression. "Go get Mrs. Crawford. She said she would help with the birth." Benjamin ran out of the house in his nightshirt, not even stopping to put on boots, and returned 20 minutes later with Mrs. Crawford, who took one look at the situation and immediately took charge. "Benjamin, get water boiling and fetch clean towels," she said briskly. "Grace, how far apart are the pains?" The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Benjamin thought he could not bear to hear Grace's cries of pain. He held her hand, wiped her face with cool cloths and whispered encouragement, feeling utterly helpless. But finally, as the sun climbed high in the sky, their baby was born. The sound of the infant's first cry was the most beautiful thing Benjamin had ever heard, and when Mrs. Crawford placed the baby in his arms, he stared down at the tiny, red, squalling face and felt his entire world shift. "It is a boy," Mrs. Crawford said, smiling. "A healthy, strong boy." Benjamin carried the baby to Grace, who was exhausted but smiling. He placed their son in her arms, and they both gazed down at him with wonder. "He is perfect," Grace whispered. "Just like his mother," Benjamin said, kissing her sweaty forehead. "You were so brave. I am in awe of you." They named him Matthew Benjamin Nash, and from the moment he entered the world, he was loved with a fierce intensity that surprised them both. Benjamin had never known he could feel this way about another human being, this overwhelming need to protect and nurture and provide. The first few months were exhausting. Matthew was a good baby, but he still woke several times a night to nurse, and Grace was often exhausted. Benjamin did everything he could to help, changing diapers, walking the floor with Matthew when he was fussy, and taking over all the household chores so Grace could rest. But even in their exhaustion, they were happy. Benjamin would watch Grace nurse their son, singing softly to him, and feel a contentment so deep it almost frightened him. This was everything he had ever wanted, everything he had thought he would never have. When Matthew was 3 months old, Grace started bringing him outside during her evening singing. She would hold him in her arms and sing her hymns, and the baby would stare up at her with wide, serious eyes, completely entranced. Benjamin would watch from the porch, his heart so full he thought it might burst. "He loves your singing as much as I do," Benjamin told her one evening. "He does seem to listen, does not he?" Grace said, smiling down at Matthew. "Maybe he will be musical too." "With you as his mother, how could he not be?" Benjamin said. As Matthew grew into a toddler, he proved to be a happy, curious child with his mother's dark hair and his father's blue eyes. He loved being outside, helping Benjamin with small chores and listening to Grace sing. His first words were "Mama" and "Papa," but his third word was "sing," which delighted Grace to no end. When Matthew was 2 years old, Grace became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier and she felt stronger throughout. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah Grace Nash, was born on a warm spring day, arriving so quickly that Mrs. Crawford barely made it in time. Sarah was different from Matthew from the start. Where he had been serious and calm, she was all smiles and laughter. She had Grace's brown eyes and Benjamin's stubborn chin, and she wrapped both her parents around her tiny finger from day one. With 2 small children, the ranch was busier and louder than ever. Benjamin expanded the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. He also increased the herd, now numbering 20 cattle, and planted more acres of wheat. The work was endless, but he had never been happier. Grace somehow managed to keep the house running, care for 2 small children, help with the ranch work, and still find time to sing every evening. Benjamin often marveled at her strength and grace, wondering how he had gotten so lucky. One evening when Matthew was 4 and Sarah was 2, Benjamin came in from the fields to find Grace teaching Matthew a hymn. The little boy's voice was high and sweet, stumbling over some of the words but earnest in his efforts. Sarah sat on the floor, Clapping her hands and babbling along, Benjamin stood in the doorway, watching his family, and felt tears prick his eyes. This was what he had been longing for during all those lonely years. This noise and chaos and love, this sense of purpose and connection. This heaven on earth that Grace had brought him. Grace looked up and saw him watching. "Come join us," she said, smiling. Benjamin crossed the room and sat down beside them, pulling Sarah onto his lap. Grace started the hymn again, and this time Matthew sang louder, proud to show his father what he had learned. Benjamin did not sing, could not with the emotion clogging his throat, but he listened and held his daughter and felt Grace's hand find his. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Benjamin and Grace lay in bed together, her head on his chest, his arms around her. "You ever regret it?" Benjamin asked quietly. "Staying here, marrying me this life?" Grace propped herself up to look at him, her expression incredulous. "Regret? Benjamin, how could you even ask that? This life, this family, this is everything I ever wanted and more than I dared to hope for." "I just worry sometimes that you gave up too much," Benjamin admitted. "Your brother, the possibility of a different life somewhere else." "I gave up nothing," Grace said firmly. "I gained everything. Benjamin, before I met you, I was lost. I had no home, no direction, no purpose. I was just drifting, following my brother's plan because I had none of my own. But then I found your field and I started singing and you found me. You gave me a home and a family and a life filled with love. How could I possibly regret that?" "I love you," Benjamin said, pulling her close. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I love you too," Grace said. "And you do not need to be scared. We have built something strong here, Benjamin, our love, our family, this ranch. It is all solid and real and it is going to last." She was right. Over the next several years, the Nash family continued to grow and thrive. Grace had 2 more children, another son named Daniel and a daughter named Ruth. The ranch expanded, becoming one of the most successful in the area. Benjamin earned a reputation as an honest, hard-working man, and Grace became known for her kindness and her beautiful singing voice. She sang at church every Sunday, her voice filling the small building and bringing tears to many eyes. She sang at weddings and funerals, at harvest celebrations and Christmas services. People said that hearing Grace Nash sing was like getting a glimpse of heaven, and Benjamin always felt a swell of pride because he got to hear her every single day. The children all inherited their mother's musical talent. Matthew became an accomplished singer and learned to play the guitar. Sarah had a voice almost as lovely as Grace's, and she loved performing. Daniel played the fiddle, and even little Ruth, at 3 years old, could carry a tune better than most adults. On Sunday afternoons, the Nash family would gather in the parlor, and they would make music together. Benjamin still could not sing well, but he had learned to play the harmonica, and the sound of his family's voices blending together was the sweetest sound he had ever heard. As the years passed, Benjamin and Grace's love only deepened. They had weathered droughts and storms, illnesses and injuries, the challenges that came with raising 4 children and running a ranch. But through it all, they had each other. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Benjamin surprised Grace by taking her back to the field where he had first heard her sing. It was evening, the same golden hour when he had found her all those years ago, and the wheat swayed in the breeze just as it had that day. "You remember?" Benjamin asked, holding her hand. "Of course," Grace said, her eyes shining with tears. "How could I forget? That was the day my life changed, the day I found my home." "I thought you were an angel," Benjamin admitted, "when I heard you singing. I thought heaven had sent someone to show me what I was missing, what I would never have. I never imagined that angel would choose to stay with me." "I am no angel," Grace said, laughing softly. "I am just a woman who was lost and found her way home." "Benjamin, these 10 years have been the happiest of my life. Every day with you and our children is a gift." "Sing for me," Benjamin said, "like you did that day." Grace smiled and turned her face to the sky. Then she began to sing, "Come, thou fount of every blessing," the same hymn she had been singing the day they met. Her voice had matured over the years, grown richer and more controlled, but it still carried the same purity and emotion that had stopped Benjamin in his tracks a decade ago. Benjamin listened, holding her hand, and remembered that lonely, desperate man he had been. He thought about all the years he had spent alone, convinced he would never have a family, never know love. And he thanked God for that day, for the drought that had driven him to check his irrigation ditches, for whatever had led Grace to his field. When Grace finished singing, Benjamin pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply. "You led me to heaven on earth," he whispered. "That is what you did with your voice, with your love. You showed me that heaven is not some distant place we go after we die. It is here, in this field, in our home, in the life we have built together." Grace was crying now, happy tears streaming down her face. "You showed me the same thing. You taught me that home is not a place but a person. Wherever you are, that is where I belong." They stood there in the field as the sun set, holding each other, and in that moment they were not a rancher and his wife, not parents of 4 children, not people with responsibilities and worries. They were just Benjamin and Grace, 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would last a lifetime. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, they could see their children playing in the yard. Matthew was chasing Sarah, while Daniel and Ruth picked wildflowers. The house glowed with warm lamplight and smoke curled from the chimney. "Look at what we have built," Grace said softly. "Together," Benjamin added. "We built it together." The years continued to pass, bringing new joys and challenges. Matthew grew into a fine young man and eventually married a girl from Montezuma. Sarah became a teacher, using her gift for music to bring joy to her students. Daniel took over much of the ranch work as Benjamin got older, and Ruth married a good man and moved to Santa Fe, though she visited often. Benjamin and Grace grew old together, their hair turning silver, their bodies slowing down. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared memories and the life they had built. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch. The house was filled with grandchildren now, 7 in total, and the sound of their laughter and play filled Benjamin with joy. But his favorite moment of the evening came when Grace stood up and announced she was going to sing. The room fell silent as Grace walked to the center of the parlor. She was 60 years old now, her voice not quite as strong as it had been in her youth, but still beautiful. She sang, "Come, thou fount of every blessing," and as her voice filled the room, Benjamin saw his children and grandchildren watching with tears in their eyes. When she finished, Matthew said, "Mama, will you tell us the story again, about how you and Papa met?" Grace looked at Benjamin, her eyes twinkling. "Why do not you start, my love?" Benjamin smiled and began. "It was August 1878, and I was the loneliest man in New Mexico. I had convinced myself I would spend my entire life alone, working this ranch with no one to share it with. But then one day, I heard the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my life. I was singing in his field," Grace continued, taking up the story. "I had nowhere to go, no money, no plan. I was praying and singing, asking God what I should do, and then your father found me." "I thought she was an angel," Benjamin said, reaching for Grace's hand. "And in a way, she was. She saved me from a life of loneliness and gave me more than I ever dreamed possible. She gave me a family, a home filled with music and love and 30 years of happiness. He offered me kindness when I needed it most, Grace said, squeezing his hand. He gave me a home and became my home, and every day since then has been a blessing. Their oldest grandson, 5-year-old Benjamin Jr., spoke up. "Grandma, will you teach me to sing like you?" Grace smiled. "Of course, my darling. Music is meant to be shared, passed down from generation to generation. It is how we remember who we are and where we came from." As the party continued around them, Benjamin pulled Grace aside onto the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, and the fields stretched out before them, golden and peaceful. 30 years, Benjamin said. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together." "I know what you mean," Grace said, leaning against him. "Benjamin, if I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a single thing, even the hard parts, the losses and struggles, because they were all part of our story." "Our story," Benjamin repeated. "I like that." "It is a good story, is not it?" "It is the best story," Grace said. "It is our love story, and it is far from over." She was right. They had many more years together. Years filled with watching their grandchildren grow. Years of quiet mornings and peaceful evenings. Years of holding hands and stealing kisses. And still, after all this time, discovering new things to love about each other. Benjamin was 75 years old when he finally slowed down enough to let Daniel fully take over the ranch. He and Grace spent their days in the garden, on the porch swing, and taking slow walks through the fields. And every evening, without fail, Grace would sing. One autumn evening, as the sun set over the land they had worked and loved for so long, Benjamin said, "Sing for me, Grace. Sing the hymn you were singing the day we met." Grace smiled and began to sing, her voice wavering slightly with age but still clear and pure. Benjamin closed his eyes and let the music wash over him, remembering that young man he had been, so lonely and lost. He thought about the woman who had appeared in his field, like an answer to a prayer, whose voice had led him to a heaven on earth he had not known existed. When Grace finished singing, Benjamin opened his eyes to find her watching him, love shining in her gaze. "Thank you," he said, "for everything. For staying, for loving me, for building this life with me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Grace Nash." "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me, Benjamin Nash," Grace said, taking his hand. "I was lost and you found me. You gave me a home and a family and more love than I ever dreamed possible. You are my heaven on earth." They sat together on the porch as the stars came out, holding hands and watching the night settle over the ranch. The house behind them glowed with light, filled with the sounds of their family gathering for Sunday supper. Their children's voices drifted out through the open windows, and somewhere inside, one of the grandchildren was practicing scales on the piano. "Listen," Grace said softly. "Do you hear that? That is the sound of our legacy. Not just the land or the house or the ranch, but the music and the love and the family we created together. That is what we are leaving behind." "It is a good legacy," Benjamin said, his voice thick with emotion. "I could not have asked for better." They sat in comfortable silence for a long while, content just to be together. Finally, Grace said, "Benjamin, do you believe in miracles?" "I used to not," Benjamin said. "But then I heard you singing in my field and you changed my mind. Yes, Grace, I believe in miracles. Because you are my miracle." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder and Benjamin put his arm around her, pulling her close. They stayed like that as the night deepened around them, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would echo through generations. The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had watched them meet all those years ago, that had seen them fall in love and marry and build their life together. And if the stars could speak, they might have said that this was what it was all about, this love between two people who had found their heaven on earth in each other. Benjamin and Grace Nash lived for many more years, continuing to grow old together with grace and dignity. Their love story became legendary in Montezuma, a tale told by parents to children, of the lonely rancher who found a woman singing hymns in his field, whose voice led him to heaven on earth. When they finally passed, years later and within months of each other, they left behind 4 children, 14 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren. They left behind a thriving ranch that had been in the Nash family for generations. But most importantly, they left behind a legacy of love and music and faith that would continue long after they were gone. And sometimes, on quiet summer evenings, people swore they could still hear singing in the wheat fields outside Montezuma, a voice so pure and beautiful it had to be an angel. The older folks would smile and say it was Grace Nash, still singing her hymns, still bringing a touch of heaven to earth. But those who knew the whole story understood that the real miracle was not the singing itself, but the love it represented. 2 lonely souls who had found each other, who had built a life and a family and a love that transcended time itself. That was the real heaven on earth, the one that Grace's voice had led Benjamin to all those years ago. And in that heaven, they lived happily ever after, their love eternal, their story complete.